morning. This is a New Testament reading from the books of Acts, chapter 9, verses 36 through 43. Now in Joppa, there was a disciple whose name was Tabitha, which in Greek is Dorcas. She was devoted to good works and acts of charity. At that time, she became ill and died. When they had washed her, they laid her in a room upstairs. Since Lydda was near Joppa, the disciples who heard that Peter was there sent 2 men to him with the request, "Please come to us without delay." So Peter got up and went with them, and when he arrived, they took him to the room upstairs. All the widows stood beside him, weeping and showing tunics and other clothing that Dorcas had made while she was with them. Peter put them all outside, and then he knelt down and prayed. He turned to the body and said, "Tabitha, get up." Then she opened her eyes, and seeing Peter, she sat up. He gave her his hand and helped her up. Then calling the saints and widows, he showed her to be alive. This became known throughout Joppa, and many believed in the Lord. Meanwhile, he stayed in Joppa for some time with a certain Simon, a tanner.
Alleluia, 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 alleluia.
Happy Mother's Day to Tabitha, Dorcas, who clearly was a mother figure to so many women in her community, and who mothers us all still today through her testimony. Tabitha's testimony became well known by the world because she died and then came back to life. But before that viral moment, Tabitha was known and celebrated locally for her business and her generosity, and even more personally, she was known and loved by a community of women with whom she shared life. Tabitha's testimony is ultimately a resurrection story, yes, but before resurrection comes death. And death is perhaps our best teacher on the value of life. So I invite us to look at Tabitha's testimony this morning through the lens of Eulogy, Elegy, and what I'm calling Easter 2.0. And as her testimony unfolds, I believe we will be blessed and challenged. First, eulogy. Have you ever had the experience of going to a funeral where maybe you didn't know the person very well at all, but because of the words that were shared and the pictures on the screen and the preacher and the stories, you walked away from that service thinking, wow, I feel like I know them now, and I'm kind of inspired by their life. Really good eulogizing can do this for us. Eulogies help us know a person for their best qualities and attributes. The word in the Greek is eu, meaning good, and logos, meaning word or speech. So literally, good words, words of praise. And did you know that eulogies are not just for the dead? You can give eulogies to the living. We just often associate eulogies with funerals because maybe for us, it's not until someone dies that we really see the value of their life as a whole. Well, Tabitha's testimony begins with a eulogy, if you will, Luke sharing with us words of praise about her impact on the local community. Luke names Tabitha as a disciple using a very specific words, methatria. It means female disciple. And Tabitha is the only person in the entire New Testament who is named as such. And this specific term of discipleship includes both the behavior of following and also of learning. I love that. Luke also includes in his eulogy of Tabitha, his words of praise, her Greek name, Dorcas. This suggests that she is a cultural hybrid. She sort of straddles the line between her Jewish community and the wider Greco-Roman world. One scholar notes she is at home both in the comfortable confines of her own faith, but also in the different cultures around her. And this makes sense because of the location of her discipleship, the port city of Joppa. Now, if Joppa is ringing a bell in your head, it's probably because you remember Joppa from Jonah's story. Jonah went to Joppa to get on a boat, literally to run as far away as he could from the call of God, to go in the opposite direction of where God wanted him to go. In contrast, here Tabitha is rooting herself in Joppa, in this port city, a place where people are always coming and going, a place where worlds come together and collide and intersect. And so, of course, this has spiritual meaning for her discipleship, revealing her comfort level with many peoples. But on a very practical level, I'm guessing it was good for business, too, to have so many people coming and going. And this brings us to the final part of Luke's eulogy of Tabitha, his words of praise for her. She was devoted to good works and acts of charity. Now I'm going to break this down in the Greek, so stay with me, people. The Greek word here for good is agathos. This is a specific kind of goodness. It means distinguished, upright, excellent, honorable. And the word for works is ergon, which means a business, an employment, occupation. That means that this large part of Tabitha's testimony and what Luke is praising and eulogizing is the fact that Tabitha Dorcas was a distinguished businesswoman with respected, honest business practices. I love that. I love to see a woman in leadership owning her own business, using her gifts of creativity to provide for herself and others. And the "and others" is really important because that's where this next phrase, acts of charity, comes in. Now, you may think that this is just giving a little money here or there, but that's not what the word in the Greek means. It really means beneficence to the poor in a way of almsgiving. In other words, it's not just that Tabitha was a successful businesswoman and showed up to her temple, tithing, although rest assured, I'm sure she did do that. But she also did something much more. She exercised an extravagant kind of generosity, a more integrated way of looking at giving and living. Tabitha literally shared what she had with those who did not have, as if it was all theirs to begin with, as if it was communal stewardship and sharing of resources. She feeds and clothes and lives in community with these widows and women, not just one time, but all the time. So yes, Tabitha, we praise you. We join Luke in eulogizing you for caring for the poor and marginalized, which widows would have been in that day. We see yourself and your stewardship. We see how you support all people and not just yourself. We praise you for using your creative gifts in business. We praise you for being the kind of person that can communicate cross-culturally. We praise you for being a disciple who follows and learns and centers your life in the values of the one whom you follow. Do you see how inspirational and contagious eulogizing can be? Friends, the first lesson I want us to take from Tabitha's testimony as Luke shares it with us is that we need to be lavish in our praise when we see people living out their faith in transformational ways that lift up the marginalized, that provide for the poor, that center community before self. We need to praise those who we see living out their calling in courageous ways, in humble ways, in ways that simply are how God gifted them to use their gifts. How lavish can you be today with your praise? Yes, to your mother and your grandmother and those who mothered you, but also to anyone and everyone you see living out their faith. Let's be honest. Most of what we read and hear and consume these days is negative. There is a lot of bad news happening in real time. And there is a lot of good news happening in real time, too. And if we fail to speak of the praiseworthy things we see happening in the world in the name of the Jesus that we see in the Gospels, not to be confused of the name of the Christian nationalist Jesus, who we really can't locate in Scripture, then if we don't name how we see Jesus living in the world, I think we're failing to live out a part of our testimony. How many people can you eulogize this week? In conversation, in texts, in phone calls, in handwritten notes, on social media, in public settings. And I know that the most important part for all of us is probably going to be when we hear somebody eulogizing us, right? Praising us. If someone sees you making a difference in the world and says thank you or points out what you are doing, let them praise you. Resist the urge to say, oh, it's not that big of a deal, or, it wasn't just me, it was also all these other people. Well, it is a big deal, and yes, it was you, even if also it was a bunch of other people. I know that this makes us uncomfortable, but the gospel is never comfortable, so there's that. But also, if we do not let people praise us for our faithful Christ-like works, then we're shutting down the gospel. Despite the humble intentions of us not wanting to receive public praise, the impact can be devastating. We might have personal insecurities about not wanting to be in the spotlight, but I think that's detrimental to our collective spirituality and our collective moral ethic, because into that vacuum of our praise, other voices are going to speak. What happens instead is that people who are doing things that do not reflect the love and light of Christ are going to get all the airtime. Their words are the ones that are going to reverberate through the headlines, and their actions end up being the ones that define Christianity. So when you see somebody helping the poor, living with the marginalized, speaking up for people's rights, teaching our children, caring for one who is suffering, eulogize them. And if you're doing those things, let people praise you. We bless the world when we do this. Get ready for a little whiplash, because we move from praise now to lament. Eulogy to elegy. This is the second part of Tabitha's testimony. If the eulogy speaks to her local impact, the elegy speaks to her personal impact on the community that knew her best. And if you haven't done this already, I know some of you are pulling out your phones, Googling, what is the difference between eulogy and elegy? No worries, I've got you. By definition, an elegy is a poem of lament or a song of mourning for the dead. I found this explanation helpful. While both eulogies and elegies are traditionally written to honor someone who has died, the difference lies primarily in tone and perspective. Eulogies, when given for the dead, look back to the past, celebrating the person's deeds and life, while elegies look forward, mourning the present and the future without that person in the present and the future. Eulogies and elegies both take different forms, but eulogies are most often prose. Elegies are poems, works of music, works of art, or anything that expresses emotion and impact on a deeper level than what words can. For example, a eulogy might say something like, Mrs. Smith was an English teacher for 10 years at Colorado Medical School, and she impacted people. An elegy would be some of Mrs. Smith's students standing up and sharing specific stories about how her not being in the classroom is impacting their lives, how she is not there to listen to their stories, to write their recommendations, to be the one that explains to them this term or that term. There's a specificity to elegy that's born out of deep relationship. It's not about the stuff printed on CVs and resumes. It's the stuff that causes the tears to fall down your face, the ache to form in your heart. Of course, I'm using the term metaphorically today. There's not a specific poem or musical composition in this text about Tabitha, but the grief of her absence is palpable in terms of how it affects those who she was in community with. There are two moments of elegy in this text, revealing the personal impact Tabitha Dorcas had on her community. The first is just mentioned in a phrase, but it's the tender tending to of her body. This is an act that would have only been done by women in that day, just as we know women close to Jesus went to the tomb to anoint him with spices. This is an intimate act done by those close to the person who has died, always by women. They washed her body after she died from illness, and they placed her in an upper room, in the Greek, a room upstairs. Luke, I think, drawing our attention to that detail to parallel with Jesus, which will come in a moment. But this is a tender, devotion-filled act of duty. I imagine women, as they washed Tabitha's body, might have been humming, might have been singing. It is elegy. Then we read that as Peter is called for and arrives, there are all these widows around, and their hands are full. They're weeping, and they're showing tunics, showing clothing that Dorcas, Tabitha, had made for them. The word weep here is kleio, which means to bewail, to wail out loud. This was not silent grief. This was guttural. This was the music of the heart. Their wailing, a sound of lamentation, and undergirding their wailing was this steady rhythm, this unrelenting beat of clinging to these garments, this thing that Dorcas had made for them, this thing that she had touched, right? Maybe you know this desire to pull close to you an item from a loved one who has died, to catch their scent one more time. Maybe you have displayed quilts or artifacts or creative items from your loved one here in our narthex during a funeral, knowing that some stories can only be told through showing, some talent only understood through the things that are created by it. So these actions of tenderly washing a body, of wailing out loud with grief, of displaying objects that were created by the one who has died, do you see how these are elegy more than eulogy? They're not quantifiable achievements, they are qualitative experiences of how Tabitha touched hearts and changed lives. So the question for us in this is that for these widows, they were thinking to themselves in their grief, there will be no more tunics made by Tabitha, which to them means, who will care for us now that Tabitha is dead? Who will clothe us? Who will create community and live with us? Community is at the heart of Tabitha's testimony. And you know, Luke, he could have mentioned any kind of man that was connected to Tabitha if he wanted to. Most women in the Bible are known by whether they're someone's sister or wife or, daughter or whatever. The man is always mentioned, if they even get a name. And here we get two names, Tabitha and Dorcas. And not only that, the two names represent two communities. Her life is defined by her relationships. So friends, when we reflect on our life and the communities of which we are a part, what do they say about us in terms of our discipleship? Who would show up wailing at our death because we were not in community with them? It's one thing if our family would show up. It's one thing if people of the same socioeconomic level would show up. But are there marginalized communities who need care, who would show up because we were no longer a part of them? Tabitha teaches something here about what it means to live and do charitable works. It's not just passing things out to the poor. It's living in community knowing they have something to teach us. How are we learning and living and laughing and loving with people who are different than us? This is a challenge for us, I think, that we receive from Tabitha's testimony. Are we following Jesus as he invites us to? Are we sitting and hanging out with the people who Jesus invites us to sit and hang out with? Are we creating authentic and equitable community between the widows of the world and the Tabithas of the world, becoming mutually dependent on one another? It's only when we understand the gift of this community that we can truly appreciate the climax of this text, which of course is Tabitha's rising, Easter 2.0. It's a part of her testimony that brings everything full circle, even as it spreads her story to a global scale, because here you are, you and I, hearing it today. Of course, on Easter Sunday, we celebrate the resurrection of Jesus. Jesus was the incarnation of God's love. Jesus' resurrection gives us hope that death is not the end of the story, that life prevails. No power can extinguish or kill God's love. Hope always rises. And while, of course, Jesus' resurrection means something very specific and different to us because of who he was, did you know his is not the only resurrection story? There's actually quite a few. There are 3 folks who are brought back to life from death by the prophets. Elijah raises the son of the widow of Zarephath. Elisha raises the son of the Shunammite woman. And then an Israelite man whose body merely touches the bones of Elisha is also raised back to life. Then there are 3 folks that Jesus himself brought back to life. The son of the widow of Nain, the daughter of the synagogue leader Jairus, and Jesus' close friend Lazarus. And then there are 2 folks who are brought back to life by Jesus' disciples. Peter raises Tabitha, Dorcas, from today's story. And then Paul, in a few days here, is going to raise Eutychus, a guy who unfortunately falls out of a window. I love the symbolism of 3 raisings by the prophets, 3 raisings by Jesus, and 2 raisings by the disciples that follow. Symbolically, it leaves the door open for us to experience the 3rd raising in our own discipleship. It's so easy for our modern minds to get caught up in the logistics of resurrection. Did these people really die? I mean, they were probably almost dead, and then somehow, they got brought back to life. But these questions are sort of fun to bat around theoretically, but they totally miss the point of the story. They miss the point of faith. You and I both know that things happen every day, medically and otherwise, that we cannot explain. I know for a fact there are those of you in this room that feel like you have a second lease on life. You overcame addiction. You survived cancer. You lived through a horrific car accident. You got out of a relationship that was unhealthy. You were adopted by a parent because your own could not provide the care you needed. This is even part of my own story. A tree limb fell on me when I was 19 and broke my C1 vertebra in my neck. Most people who break their necks are paralyzed, if not dead. But I'm here preaching to you today, not paralyzed, not dead. Call me an anomaly, call me lucky, call me a miracle. I could have been dead, I'm alive, but couldn't all of us say that? Any one of our hearts could have stopped beating last night while we slept, but they didn't. You see, we can't answer all the questions of why this happens to one person and not to another, but none of us are guaranteed a number of breaths or a number of days in our life. Every breath we take, every day we have is a precious gift. So what do we do with that precious gift? This is Tabitha's challenge to us. Because what we see through the breaths that she takes while she's living, through the life and community that she cares for and pours herself into, is that had they not known about her or cared about her, no one would have even known when she died. No one would have said, oh, go get Peter, maybe he can help, right? It's because the community knew her and loved her that a community was there to help with her raising and her rising. It's because of the way her life impacted other people that new believers were created in the Lord, not just because of her death and then coming back to life after that. I'm calling this Easter 2.0 because Tabitha, if you think about it, she helps resurrect life and hope in the lives of so many widows and women around her while she's still living. The real power of raising in her story is all the women who Tabitha helped raise up. And yes, God breathed into life a second chance for Tabitha. And we don't know why. We just get to celebrate that that's part of her story. Life is not fair in terms of who gets a Tabitha-type miracle and who doesn't. It's just not. If anyone tells you there's a reason, there's not. Life is just not fair sometimes. But while each of us has breath in our lungs, we all have the opportunity to be the kind of person like Tabitha who helps raise up those around her. She truly is a mother to the world in this sense. I'll leave you with one final Greek word, anestete. That is the phrase that Peter says to Tabitha. It means arise, get up, stand up. Did you know that phrase is found over 100 times in the New Testament? It's usually not related to dead people coming back to life. It's most often used in the context of waking people up to the world around them, to a new way of seeing, to a new perspective, helping them see something in a different way. Peter's command is something we all need to hear ourselves on a daily basis as we become numb to the world around us or dead to the concerns of those in need. We need to hear, wake up, get up, arise. See with new eyes. Your gifts are needed. Stop sleepwalking. Become awake to the world. Where do you need to wake up? I truly wonder what it was like for Tabitha when Peter said, get up. We read in the text that her eyes flutter open. Do you catch what happens next? She doesn't stand up on her own. Peter gave Tabitha his hand and helped her stand up. Resurrection is never a solitary event. It happens in community for community. Friends, this moment is the moment before the rest of your life begins. Every breath is a new beginning. A second chance of life comes to us with every new day. What are you going to do differently this afternoon than you did this morning? Hear these words, Calvary. Get up, arise, wake up, flutter your eyes open, see the gift of this new day, how precious life is. Rise up, and on your way, stick out your hand and pull someone else up with you. For it is in our rising together that our testimonies rise and give voice to the gospel good news in the world. Amen.